Well, it's that time of year again when the Stewardship Committee has tasked me with preaching a riveting homily on stewardship. You remember the riveting homily from last year, I'm sure, correct? Oh, come on, you do remember it, don't you? Oh, yes, thank you. You know, the 15th chapter of Luke, you know, the gospel about the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son, you know, that gospel. You remember the homily that I preached that was so riveting about stewardship with that gospel, correct? Well, this year, guess what? I had yet another task before me in terms of taking our scriptures today and somehow making it a riveting stewardship homily. So today, as we hear in our scriptures, we hear about forgiveness. We hear about God's graciousness shown us and God being forgiving to us, generously forgiving to us, showing us great love and compassion again and again and again. And in our first reading from the book of Sirach is reminding the people yet again that what we are to be about is first and foremost that love of God that informs and guides our love for one another. And in living the commands of God, in loving God and loving neighbor and all the many manifestations that takes place in our daily lives, that we are opening ourselves ever more so to the wonder and the love of our God. And on our part, it is that continuous intentional awareness of God's presence to us, just how much our God shows us great love, how much mercy and forgiveness our God extends us again and again, and that our God ever compassionate and patient and generous and gracious with us, that we come here as a people of faith in our awareness of just the wonder of our God and our God's love and our God's goodness. When we then turn to our gospel account, again, a lesson on forgiveness. Here, Peter, going to Jesus, says, how many times must I forgive another? Now, Judaic law said 3 was enough. 3 times was enough. That's all you had to forgive another person was 3 times. And Peter, in his asking Jesus if 7 is the right number, Peter's thinking, I'm being really gracious and generous, and Jesus is going to be impressed that I'm willing to forgive another 7 times and not just 3 times. And lo and behold, what does Jesus do? He sort of pulls that rug out from under Peter yet again, and he says, no, not 7 times. And I'm sure Peter's thinking, he's going to go and he's going to say, no, I only have to do it 3 times. And then Jesus says, oh no, 77 times, which had to be startling, stunning to Peter and the disciples in hearing this number, because it really is a number that's infinitesimal, that we are to always, without exception, to be merciful and forgiving of others, that we do so because of how gracious and generous our God is with us in loving us and forgiving us time and time again. And so we come here and we hear this story, and then Jesus then to firm up the story that there's a clear understanding of how this plays itself out in our lives. He presents this parable, and he talks about a king who has many servants that owe him varying sums of money, and so he's doing an accounting, and so he calls in this one, and the servant comes in, owes him a huge amount of money. The truth is, it's an amount of money that this servant will never, ever, ever be able to repay. Never. Huge amount. Never will he ever be able to repay it in his lifetime. And so here, the master, the king, he goes, I'm just sort of going to cut my losses. So I'm just going to sell you. I'm going to sell your wife. I'm going to sell your children. I'm going to sell your property, and cut my losses. That'll satisfy the debt. And the servant begging, pleading, please, please, please be patient with me. I will pay you back in full. I will pay you back in full. A promise that he can never, ever keep. I will pay you back in full. The king, the master, showing great compassion, forgives him his loan. And then this very same servant goes out and meets a fellow servant who owes him a much lesser amount, an amount that the other servant will be able to repay in a timely manner, will be able to do so. And yet, this same servant who has received great compassion and generosity from the master, from the king, then says, no, I want my money now. And if you cannot give me my money now, I am going to have you thrown into prison. Now, the way that the system worked back then was that, let's say the fellow servant owed $300. And a day's wage was $10. So he would be thrown into jail for 30 days. 30 times 10, 300. Is that right? Is my math correct? 300. So 30 days, a month. And then his debt is satisfied. That's how it worked. And it worked like that even, in terms of if you were taking lashes. A lash had a certain value and, and that sort of thing. So now, so here the other servants see this and they're disturbed and they go and tell the master, the king, what has transpired. And the king calls him in and says, you wicked servant. How could you not show the same compassion that I showed you to your fellow servant? How can you not do that? You see, the error of the servant who received a great, generous gift from the master, where he failed was that he lacked gratitude. He lacked gratitude not only to the master who forgave him the debt, but he lacked gratitude to God, who gave the master a compassionate heart. He lacked gratitude. Gratitude always has some sort of reciprocal response. That when we are grateful, when we recognize the blessing that we have experienced, that we have received, we want to respond in some way, acknowledging that generosity, that graciousness that has been shown us. And as we hear this story, what we're really called to and what this parable reminds us of is that we too have a responsibility in light of God's love and God's mercy and forgiveness. If you will, we are to be good stewards of God's love and God's mercy. We are the ones who bring to light the wonder of our God's love and our God's good. And we have a responsibility to be good stewards of all the graciousness, generosity, love, and mercy that our God extends us. We do so being with grateful hearts. We do so knowing how gracious and generous our God is. We do so in light of how we then respond to one another, in our willingness not only to be present to each other, but also in our willingness to forgive and to show great love and compassion to one another as well. And so as we come here, we are to be stewards, first and foremost, of God's love and God's mercy. We are the ones that extend that to one another. Oftentimes we reduce stewardship to a parish program. Some who are a little jaded and cynical would say that it's all about getting money for the parish. But others would, recognizing the broader perspective of stewardship, recognizing that, yes, it gives us pause as a community, individually, to reflect upon our gifts, how God has blessed us, and how are we responding to God's graciousness and generosity shown us in gift of time and talent. And so as we come here, first and foremost, we can't do anything about time and talent if we first do not recognize with grateful hearts the love that our God shows us. That first and foremost, that asking ourselves, are we good stewards of God's love? Are we good stewards of God's mercy and God's forgiveness? And only when we can say yes and asking ourselves the hard questions around that we are willing to be compassionate and caring and gracious and generous with others, do we then recognize how else we can respond to God's great generosity shown us. We come here this weekend and we hear about mercy and forgiveness. We hear about God's great love that is gracious and generous, unconditionally merciful and forgiving. And we pray that we open ourselves to that wonder, that we come before our God grateful for the love that our God shows us, grateful for the mercy that our God shows us, grateful for the forgiveness that our God shows us, grateful for the blessings that our God bestows upon us. Then and only then, as stewards of God's love and God's mercy, are we able to truly give of ourselves to one another in service, in time, in ability, even in treasure. Only then, with a grateful heart, do we respond to God's love, God's mercy, and God's generosity shown us.